All right. Good morning, South by Southwest. How's everybody doing? Well, thanks everyone for making time this morning for this session titled Beyond the Buzz, Navigating Hype in Advertising. Let me first, before we get into the session, just tell you a little bit about the session, which I know you've read the description, it's in the app, but sometimes what happens is you go to a session, you show up, and it's not what you thought it was, and you don't have enough time to get to something else. So let's just go ahead and talk a little bit about how I'm framing this conversation on navigating hype in advertising, and why I'm specifically the one talking about it. My name is Noor Naseer. I work in the advertising technology space, and I've worked in advertising for over 15 years. My focus is in digital strategy. I'm a storyteller. I work with a lot of different brands and advertisers. And this is really the bread and butter of what I do, is showcasing stories around emerging technologies related to advertising and marketing. So I'd like to get a sense of who is in the room, who here works in either advertising or marketing. Wow, I wish somebody was taking a picture up here because it's basically everyone. Who does not work in advertising or marketing? 1, 2, 3, it's like 6 people. Okay, I'm still gonna try to make it actionable for you. So it really boils down to the fact that how we're susceptible to hype is something that impacts us both personally as consumers and also as marketers and advertisers. So that's gonna be a steady theme throughout this conversation here. So I actually want to have a little disclaimer at the top because the definition for hype isn't always flattering. So here it is: the businesses, brands, and people mentioned in this presentation are highlighted to illustrate the impact of hype on society and on marketers and advertisers. I'm registering neutral on everybody that I'm showcasing here, and it's up to you to do the interpretation. So just making mention of that as we get going. Oh, also, I realized very late, I don't actually have an agenda in this presentation, so I'll mention what the agenda is here now. We're gonna define what hype is, and then how it manifests in society, and what it will take for you to navigate it. So let's get going. So we, as consumers and as marketers, we're inundated, but just as marketers in general, with different things pertaining to hype. These are just some of the things that I have exposure to, and they include some of the following here. And maybe some of these things resonate with you. Maybe you think a lot of different things are missing, but ultimately, we're all susceptible and, again, inundated with these different things. I remember, I'm sure some of you do, I only have really one major food item on there, the Popeyes chicken sandwich, which I think people were like getting in brawls over that. It was like a very big deal at the time. But hype really does work. And we've also been impacted as marketers and advertisers. And there are a number of things that our clients have been asking us about over these last several years. Again, there's an expectation that you can share perspective on different types of things pertaining to Web3, maybe things in the AR and VR space, artificial intelligence, new streaming services, new social platforms. It's all on the table for you to be giving a sensibility of whether it's worth to invest and if there's an opportunity to engage with the audiences that you're responsible for connecting with. So I kind of have been talking around what hype is, but I didn't define what it is yet. So here's a little question for everybody in the room. Which of the following could be an example of hype? Is it an emerging trend, like a TikTok dance? Is it a brand? Could it be a product or a service? Is it a feature of a product? Or is it all of the above? I think it's a little bit reasonable to expect that it can be anything and everything as it pertains to what hype could be. So with that in mind, here's a definition. And I read a lot of different definitions around hype, and there are different ways to define it. I didn't want to share every last one, but admittedly, the most common definition wasn't the most flattering. And here's a little bit about it. To promote or publicize a product or idea intensively, often exaggerating the importance or benefits. Sometimes the definition was just the first part. Sometimes the definition was both parts, including the exaggeration component. And I'd say that as consumers in general, we're kind of on the hunt for hype in general. And it speaks to the fact that we live in this age where we're constantly scrolling, looking for something. And just to make a quick mention of our social media behaviors, we're scrolling on average 300 feet a day or 21 miles a year, which is like close to how much scrolling you would do if your fingers were running a marathon. So a ton of scrolling out there looking for something. And I know probably your feeling is that, oh, I'm not scrolling for hype, I'm scrolling for something else. And oftentimes what we're really looking for is something that's new and novel. That's the natural means by which we're doing this kind of interaction. We're looking for something that's going to enliven us. And Psychology Today actually released a report in which they showcase that when we are seeking novelty, it has to do with the fact that the brain has a novelty center, and we're looking to feel positive about our lives, we're looking to get into a good mood, and a part of that is why it is that we're constantly searching for this in places, in people, in different ideas, and in products and services that we engage with. And that's where marketers and advertisers are naturally concerned about bringing it into the folds of what it is that they're offering. And also some components of novelty. They include, probably not surprisingly, we should be presenting something that is new, it should be unique, and it should feel original. So I want to shift from there. I've been talking about hype a little bit, novelty a little bit, and the thing is that a lot of these terms really kind of engage with one another in one way or another, and we want to align this connectivity as far as what marketers and brands really care about, and advertisers, of course. So let me kind of shift our conversation into some other things that run into one another, starting with innovation. I'm going to share a little definition for each one of these. Innovation can be defined as the implementation of ideas that result in the introduction or improvement of goods or services. I want to correlate this innovation to something else, technology. And the definition for technology is the application of scientific knowledge for practical purposes related to an industry, which could include artificial intelligence, robotics, software, hardware, cloud computing services, right? A ton of things fall into this space. And incidentally, everything I just described is also connected to innovation, right? Technology companies naturally want to be innovative. So there's this kind of through line between those two things. And then if you're in a space that's technology forward, where you're offering innovation, sometimes those things will trend. And here's a definition around trends: a direction in which something is developing or changing, a general movement, or a current style or preference, right? So that's, of course, also a desire of people who are working in the tech space or in an innovation-based space. You're looking for these different components. And then I would say that finally, you may want to hype those things up. And here's that definition, at least a part of that definition from earlier: intensive publicity or promotion. Now here's the challenge. If something is innovative from a tech company that is trending, then it's worthy of putting in the time and attention to hype it up because it deserves it. But everything that is hyped is not necessarily innovation or necessarily tech-focused and worthy of trending, but it could still start to trend, right? So there is this connectivity, but it doesn't work both ways. These are not synonyms. They just kind of congeal together, and people who are marketing things could be doing it in a way where they're expecting you to see there being synergy amongst these core qualities. And marketers, like I mentioned, they're naturally looking for things that are new and novel for very reasonable purposes. Kantar put together a study in which they found brands are 2.5 times more likely to significantly grow market share when they deliver strong experiences tied to innovation, which, of course, that makes sense. And we oftentimes see this on products, that things are new and improved, they taste better, and we see that with regularity because that's oftentimes what consumers want, but it's also what they're naturally looking for. And just a couple more pointers along those lines, also from Kantar, some points here. 79% of companies rank innovation amongst their top 3 priorities. again, connected to some of what we've already discussed. And also 40% expect to significantly increase their spend this year. Even in these times when there has been some challenges with spending, disruption in different industries, there is this necessity to say, where does the innovation exist and how can we bring it into the folds of our organization so we can stay a cut ahead? So here we're going to look at two things. One of them is something that I'd say most of the people in this room, especially since there's so many marketers, you're already familiar with, which is the innovation adoption curve. So I'm not going to go through and explain this, but what I do want to highlight is that there was a research firm, Hunter Research, which did an analysis showcasing the fact that there is a tremendous incongruence between the innovation adoption curve and the hype cycle. And we're going to talk about the hype cycle a little bit later on. And it's not that it's not that it necessarily exactly plays this way. I'm going to talk about the hype cycle more later on as well. But we can clearly see that as innovation is adopted, the hype cycle can be working at a speed faster where there's a dip before the early majority or the late majority is even on that bandwagon. And something I'll have to say about the hype cycle as well is that it doesn't even necessarily go all the way through to the end. Things can just, I would say the hype cycle is like a roller coaster where you can be ejected at any moment. So it's a scary thing about hype cycles. We're trying to prove new innovation out, but some of it is hyped and it's not going to make it to the end of the ride. So again, we'll talk more about that in a bit. So what are our needs as marketers and advertisers? I've kind of insinuated some of these things, but I just want to be crystal clear. Why are we leaning in? What are our curiosities? One, we have an ongoing need to identify and understand trending innovation. It's an expectation of our clients, whoever your end client is. Also, we need clarity around human elements that are driving these differing trends. And we have a responsibility to identify where there are meaningful opportunities for brands and advertisers and the organizations that we work for, right? Like that's just a baseline understanding associated with the work that we do. And so naturally, at least I feel this is a natural reality of the world we live in today, we kind of have gotten to a place, given everything that I've already said, kind of follow tech lore. And I'll define what I see tech lore to be with a couple of principles, starting with principle one. Again, when we get to Q&A, maybe people will have some perspective on the way that I see things fit here. Principle of tech lore number one, according to my observations. Thou shalt accept hype. You are going to lean in and really give it a good try. Give yourself the opportunity to say, well, what's all this hype about? And we should probably learn about it and maybe even go ahead and engage in it for the brands that we support and the accounts that we support. And why is it that we're so susceptible to it? And I know I just framed some of that in those three previous points, but I want to be even more particular. We're on this relentless hunt for the next big thing because, again, that's an expectation that we're held to. There's a pressure to meet rapidly changing consumer demands. There's a compulsion to reinvent and to evolve frequently. We have a promise or a belief that there is a better solution out there, and there's something really exciting about adopting and presenting something new to whoever that end client is to meet their expectations and the audiences you seek to engage with. Also, this is something we'll really lean into, disenchantment with what's currently available. And that's something I'm really going to lean into heavily in this presentation is that we're disenchanted with a lot of things that are available to us specifically as digital marketers today. And then finally, there's a desire to put one's mark on the business, right? You want to lean in because you want to do good for yourself and the organizations that you work for, and ultimately the audiences or consumers you're expected to engage with. Principle of tech lore number two. Love thy founder. Yeah. So let's talk about that. Hype has a hype man, a hype woman, a hype person, and they have been successful in getting rounds of funding for a lot of different types of projects that have been highly marketable. Doug Evans for Juicero. I'm going to talk about Juicero for a little bit. Who remembers Juicero? Okay, not as many people as I thought. This is really gonna resonate with you in a little bit, guys. He raised $120 million in 2017 for his juicing technology company. Then there was Theranos with Elizabeth Holmes in 2018. She raised $900 million. Adam Neumann raised $22 billion through 2019 for WeWork. And then FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried raised $1.8 billion through 2022. And I know they're not all in the same category. Not all of them have criminal charges against them. I understand that. But they all are experts at hype in differing ways. So let's just talk about that a little bit more. So for any people who are fans, and this is going to tell you a little bit about me, fans from Once Upon a Time, The Hills, and I think a spin-off of The Hills, there was a famous PR mogul named, she's still alive, Kelly Cutrone, and she said these words recently. She said that it's a great story, charisma, and something to sell that equals a great brand. And I think that's fair for Kelly Cutrone to say, because it's not her job to build the products and services, right? It's her job to sell the hype and make sure that products that are good, services and technologies, or whatever it is that she's servicing, she's in the fashion space, but whatever it is that she's representing is showcasing the best foot forward and getting out there in front of consumers. So I think that's fair for her. I don't think that's fair for technology founders, and that's something for marketers and advertisers and really anybody to be thinking about. And then, interestingly, this is a rating from a 2023 Edelman Trust Barometer where they found that US businesses were more trusted than the government or the media. Now, admittedly, these stats, these numbers are not the most impressive. What they found is that large technology companies that trust rating was at 26%, which isn't high, but somehow it's higher than trust in newspapers, the criminal justice system, TV news, big business, and Congress. So it's light years ahead, and big tech players, and just tech players in general, can capitalize on that. Principle of tech lore number 3. Ask few questions. Don't ask too many questions. So with that in mind, I don't know if this commercial is jumping out at everybody. This is just from, I want to say 2 years ago. We're going to play, I'll let you guys know when we're going to stop playing it, but let's go ahead and get going on this. I hope everybody knows who Larry David is, and he's a little skeptical. So let's go ahead and play this. This is a commercial from FTX.
I call it the wheel.
I don't think so. What does it do?
It rolls.
Yeah, so does a bagel, okay? A bagel you can eat. One of the worst ideas I've ever heard.
Brother David, behold, the fork. I got 10 forks right here, baby. Am I right? Huh? My lord? What is it? A toilet, my lord. A toilet? You expect this court to do its business inside? We're not animals. We go outside like humans.
It's coffee. It's new.
Oh, it's awful.
You don't like it?
I'm all jittery and feel like I got a big job coming on.
Hancock, you sign first. No king! Gentlemen, have you taken leave of your senses?
The people shall have the right to vote.
Even the stupid ones? Yes! Stupid people vote? Yes!
There's an expectation that companies that want to take advantage of telling people to not ask a lot of questions can allow you to lean into the hype without actually getting a true sense of what it is that you are investing in, whatever that investment looks like. So what enables hype? What enables us to lean into this? And I'd say everybody in the room is going to be familiar with all of these tactics. Just because we're familiar with them doesn't mean that we're not susceptible to it. And that includes getting social media presence, influencer collaboration, leveraging SEO tactics, using paid media or advertising, content marketing, events or pop-up shops, brand storytelling, and celebrity endorsements. There's a lot of marketers and advertisers in this room. I imagine you could add even more things to this list, but these are some of the most common ways in which we can get hype out there. Now, I know it's not just hype that we use this for, but it's a means by which hype can be shared amongst the masses. And that enables value inflation, right? If we're trying to push something and it's specifically hype, then we can get to a place where something is blown out of proportion and there can be harm associated with that value inflation on an individualized level and beyond. And that's where we get into places like this, where a couple of unfortunate headlines. Juicero is still the greatest example of Silicon Valley stupidity. You may not know why. We're going to showcase it in just a second. Theranos, disgraced Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes is booked into prison in Texas to begin serving 11-year sentences. WeWork, from $47 billion to $270 million. WeWork, the Adam Neumann brainchild, keeps crashing after a going concern warning. And finally, for FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried convicted of a multi-billion-dollar FTX fraud. The thing that's crazy about this all happened in less than 10 years ago. What happened with FTX happened 2 years ago. And we're a part of this equation, right? Even as marketers and advertisers and as consumers, we can lean into this and it can impact us. So we really want to just keep that in mind around how susceptible we can be. So here we're going to get a little bit more into Juicero. There was an expose that was released about Juicero, and the very quick story is they released this $500 to $700 machine that presses juice out of a bag, and they're saying that you need the $700 juicing machine to get the juice out of the bag. And there was some sort of rationale for why. Bloomberg did basically a expose showcasing that maybe you didn't need the machine after all. It's just mentioning that it's a cold press juicer. That's the machine. It was retailed for $6.99. We're putting in the juice. That's the bag. It looks like an IV drip. So they're saying it has a super powered squeezing capacity that you need to spend hundreds of dollars for. He got $120 million worth of funding for that, guys. Okay, so we're gonna cut to minute 3 of the second clip. This was after Juicero fell apart, and they did an interview with Doug Evans. You can go ahead and get all the way up to 3. Right there, that's good.
Where his idea for Juicero found a receptive audience.
There are things that, like certain dreams I had, were shattered, right? But my destiny may not be tied to my dreams.
What dreams were shattered?
Well, I mean, I think that Juicero was killed in the first inning, right? And, you know, normally a baseball game is 9 innings. This was killed in the first inning. I mean, people were very enthusiastic. They saw the idea of making fresh juice readily available, either in the home or in offices or in stadiums and theaters. I mean, we had the best investors in the world. We had Google Ventures, we had Kleiner Perkins, we had Campbell's Soup.
Why do you think people are wrong when they say Juicero is the embodiment of Silicon Valley excess?
Because they really don't understand what the mission was and the facts, and how any new technology starts off expensive, and then as you innovate and you iterate, prices come down over time. So they just got stuck on a narrative.
What do you think the media got wrong about Juicero?
Everything. They just had no clue.
Tell me more.
I mean, it's not even worth my breath. I'm done. I'm not going to talk about it.
What did they misunderstand about
everything? Well,
like what?
William, I'm done. Next.
You're not going to tell the media?
No. We're done with Juicero.
No Juicero.
No more Juicero. I'm going to count to 3, and I'm going to walk away.
Okay. He's done with Juicero. Okay. So let's talk about the bigger picture here and what it is that we can actually lose sight of. Because again, he did showcase some really high value investors that leaned into these his project in particular, but also others. And I want to make this point. Intrinsic value matters. Again, remember the disclaimer, I'm not smack talking anybody, but we're going to talk about NFTs for just a second here and whether or not people should be worried. This was a quick interview from MSNBC.
I don't know about NFTs, Gary. I'm worried about those.
You shouldn't be. Not every sports card, not every piece of art, not every sneaker is worth something. Just like we talked about during that summer, 99% were destined to not be the most profound thing. For every Jackson Pollock and Andy Warhol and Michael Jordan rookie card in collectibles, there's 99% of things that don't matter. Right. In the hype and excitement of 18 months ago, people assumed every single one was going to be, but we've obviously become more educated, and that's the ebbs and flows of every market. And this viewership knows more than anybody on earth the ebbs and flows of supply and demand.
Okay, that's the full clip, but I think there may be some fans of NFTs in the room, and I think NFTs in theory could make a comeback. Maybe they already are, but the challenge is that is a question of the intrinsic value, which is the only thing a marketer and advertiser can truly understand. You're not in the collectible business. You're not trying to game a system. You're trying to offer actual value for products and services and solicit it to consumers and or other audiences that you're responsible for engaging with. And if we can't figure out what that intrinsic value is, then we have a big problem. And blowing hype out of proportion, I don't know if you noticed in the clip, Gary almost said hype, and then he said, and then just didn't finish the word. Because there's this kind of the two sides, right? The two ways of interpreting it. So just keep that in mind. Intrinsic value always matters. Okay, so I'm going to get us into a little formula as far as actually assessing, in general, how we think about this from a business perspective. So when we're putting together and understanding how much we want to pay, let's say, for something or assess the value of something, in general, and this was based on a report from Vox, you're going to put together the wages that you would pay to people who are working in the facilitation or development of a technology or other type of product or service, add the investments that were made in relation to that as well, and that's going to give you the cost of production. So it's a little business 101 lesson for everybody. Then you're going to take that cost of production and you're going to subtract it from the sales price, and that's going to give you the markup. And the thing about markup is that with hype, there's a lot of room for massive markups. I showcased in that slide at the beginning of the presentation all those different things that I'm susceptible to, and one of them included Peloton, which I'm an owner of a Peloton, and I do use it, probably not with the frequency that I should be, but I have one. And the thing about the markup on that product in particular is that it originally was retailing for $2,250, I think is what it is. How many people bought the original Peloton for that original price? A couple people did. Are there any Peloton riders in general in this room? There's a couple. Okay, so some people bought it after. Not that many people raised their hands. It went from $2,250, now it's selling for around $1,400. That's a 35% price decrease. It has a lot to do with the fact that the hype has died down significantly around the product. Of course, there are other externalities when the product was released, the skyrocketing around the pandemic, but there's an issue as it relates to the value that it's delivering to consumers, and so there's that drop. Again, doesn't mean it's not a valuable product, but hype is what allows us to expand the size of that markup. And then also, this from Bain & Company is the elements of value. So this is a smaller interpretation associated with some of the things that it entails. And I want to showcase somewhere where we've seen the opposite of what I just mentioned for Peloton with the Apple iPhone. So this is a image of the original iPhone from 2007. And this is a version from 2023. And I remember back in 2007 when the device was originally released, I think the price point was around $600, and that felt crazy. Unlike Peloton, this device has gone to almost double the price point from what it originally was. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the intrinsic value for consumers, the audience that iPhone seeks to reach, or Apple seeks to reach, is very much there. And this elements of value pyramid that they developed, and the portion that I'm showcasing, highlights the fact that, and I won't read through each element here, but that so many components, whether they're functional, emotional, personal, and social, those are things that it consistently hits on year after year. And so I would just think about some of these things as it relates to other things that we want to analyze as advertisers and marketers, making sure that we're showcasing to people the value that we're bringing to the table so that they stay with us or level up with us. So we've got to do our due diligence around hype solutions specifically. That means we have to go on a fact-finding mission all the time, and I know people do this. So let's take a look at what the solution criteria is for a stakeholder in general. I'm going to correlate what we do as marketers relative to stakeholders who are more in the investment category, like was mentioned earlier on in relation to those big tech founders. So there's a little bit of crossover as far as what it is that we look at as marketers and advertisers versus investors. So on the investing side, they're looking at the financial health of a company, the potential for growth, the strength of the management team, what have their past successes been, and the potential exit strategy so that they can make their money back and more, versus marketers who are looking at implementation feasibility. You're looking for a quality solution, quality that you need to assess. Interoperability, how does this correlate with things that we're already doing in-house, especially if it has something to do with innovation and tech? And then what's a contractual assessment? What is this going to mean to us monetary-wise and any other types of holdup that we're going to need to keep in mind as we expand this relationship? And then there's a little bit of crossover. We're both looking for a strong value proposition and we're looking for innovation. So in general, as it relates to everything that I've just mentioned, we want to keep an eye out for and avoid a vague value proposition or something that's just giving us good vibes only. Vibes isn't enough, right? In general, as marketers and advertisers, we have an expectation to lean in deep and really understand what is being solicited to us. And we need to seek out something that is truly distinctive and valuable and where there is a measurable benefit and where we understand what it is that we're measuring. So let's finally ride these hype cycles and talk about it. So I pulled a couple of these Google Trends charts, and here's one of them. This is showcasing searching search trends for cryptocurrency, blockchain, and NFTs. And you can see there was a lot of heat in 21 and 22, and by the end of 2023, close to 2024, there's been a lot of drop-off on this. By comparison, for the metaverse, a lot of activity in 2022, as you can see. It's dropped off quite a bit, right, as of late. And then finally, for generative AI and artificial intelligence, we're still seeing a big growth in search activity. There's still, I'd say, in 2024, it's still riding pretty high, but it was dead before really now, specifically for generative AI. And at the end of 2022, that's where there's been this dramatic lift, which I'm sure you've seen people talking about in other sessions. But hype can happen abruptly to lead us upwards and also downwards. So when should you believe the hype? So let's get into the actual hype cycle. And I know I showcased it a little bit earlier, but I'm sure some of you are familiar with Gartner, and they have created the concept and the methodology for the hype cycle. And the idea is that there are so many different technologies that we need to have an understanding of and figure out, is there going to be actual business impact in association with them? And so they have this build out where there's an innovation trigger where new things that are hyped or innovative or trending can come into existence, and then they ride upwards towards a peak of inflated expectations, but then ultimately it can ride down into a trough of disillusionment. And some of the components we most commonly see in relation to that include the fact that we're looking at something that is highly novel in many cases. It's also usually unrefined, or there isn't an immediate product that you can take advantage of. There's going to be increased risk if we want to get involved at this point in these earlier stages. There's going to be an insecure investment, and there's uncertain outcomes, which these are kind of correlated concepts. But then, if we can make it through that wave, The second part of the hype cycle is this. If you can get through that trough of disillusionment, you can hit the slope of enlightenment and move on to a plateau of productivity. And plateau in general maybe sounds negative, but in this case, it's not. What we want when we finally hit that plateau is to see stability associated with innovation or technology. And we're looking for actionable products, something that's going to be accessible to us, that works for us, utility, proven value, and it doesn't always have to be universal appeal, but it should be universally appealing to the audiences or the purposes with which we're looking to engage with that tech. So here's a recent hype cycle. I'm not showcasing every last thing that is highlighted here. Hype cycle reports are released on a yearly basis. I wanted to highlight some of the things that general consumers know about. So some of those things include the metaverse, as you can see, is in a much earlier state at this time, super apps, also components related to Web3, generative AI, and NFTs, just to name a couple of different things. Now, that's in general. For the general consuming public, what I really want to get to is a hype cycle for digital marketers. What are the things that impact you from an advertising perspective and as marketers in general? So we're looking all the way through. I would say many of the things we're commonly thinking about, they're not the most exciting things, like some of the things from the previous slide, because there isn't always direct application with some of those technologies. But if you're more in that technological side of things or more in the digital side of things, here are some of the things you're commonly playing with. Generative AI, which we did see on the previous slide. AR and VR, there may be consideration depending upon the audience you're seeking to engage with. And then a lot of things that I'm calling the 2.0 version of something that already existed, including measurement 2.0, identity 2.0, ad or media quality, and streaming wars 2.0. So this isn't everything. These are just the plotting of a couple things because this is about how to navigate hype, not every last thing that's out there. But the challenge here, as far as me calling it 2.0, is the fact that in the digital marketing and advertising world today, everything is breaking down. It's a scary time. We're moving into the second wave because so much of what we've relied upon is not working in the way that we historically could rely on. And as we're moving forward, we're praying that these new technologies that are being brought to the table actually do what we need so that we can fulfill the goals that whoever our end clients are and what they're expecting of us. So this is a quote from David Cohen, the CEO of the Interactive Advertising Bureau. He said this, "We're at a critical inflection point in our digital evolution." And I tried to chart the number of things that were out there, like make a succinct chart for everyone. There's just too many things. It's a mess. And in general, if you are, again, in the digital marketing and advertising space, these are all things that you're either dealing with, or you're actively reconciling, or you're putting on the back burner. And ultimately, it's increasingly becoming our responsibility to say, if what we knew in the past was working and now it isn't, we have no choice but to directly confront some of these things and figure out if they're hype or if there's something valuable, there's innovation that we're ready to lean into. An organization called the Futures Platform makes this point. There are a bunch of futurists that speak on this topic and build out reports and research. They made this important point. If you are too early, the market isn't ready, and you end up losing time and money. If you are late, others will grasp the lion's share of the benefit. And that's not exactly a problem in general for advertisers and marketers because we're really looking for a lot of things that are going to be appealing to everyone, right? Universally applicable solutions. In a previous time that I've spoken at South by, I talked about the cookieless future and everything that's happening with identity. And we're not all looking for our own isolated solution. We're looking for many things that will be standardized. But there's also unique use cases that we all are going to be responsible for. So as far as actually navigating hype, what do we have to do, knowing that this is just a segment of some of the many challenges we're dealing with? I came across this from Kantar. I kind of reinterpreted it based on what I think makes sense for advertisers and marketers. And there's this build out as far as how we can assess hype, where we can take new technologies that we're thinking about and showcase them. So we have this XY axis. On one end, we have this perceived customer value, and on the other, we have this business impact. So in the bottom left-hand corner, if a solution is brought to us, it's frictionless, but it's low value. That means it could be meeting a need, but it's disconnected from a larger brand promise that they're making to us, as in the technology provider or whoever that solution provider is. It could be low impact and unmemorable, both for us and whoever it is that we're looking to impact. Secondarily, there's undifferentiated value. Where there is value, it could be somewhat memorable, but ultimately, they're just making an attempt to offer something that is already functioning, but not taking us to the level that we're seeking innovation for. And then finally, what we really all want, which is meaningful, differentiated, and something that is high value, where we're offering something that has superior functionality. We also have alignment with our distinct need, which is what everybody in this room wants, right? You want something that has to do with the challenges that you're looking to solve for your unique use case. And you want something ideally that's gonna be memorable, right? Like that's gonna be the gut check, is saying, this is actually gonna impact and change the way we work, not putting me into this middle space of saying, I have no idea what's going on here, but I'm trying to ride this wave because I think other people are doing it. So you could put some of these things that we've showcased on previous slides on this one, and when I say I mean some of the other companies that are out there, we could plot them right here on this chart. I would say that Juicero probably, they offered a frictionless experience. In theory, if you paid $700 for that machine, you would get juice squeezed out on your behalf. But is the value there? Not really, right? And you can do the same thing with other brands. Whatever that brand, or rather that solution is, that technology, that innovation is, we want to figure out what that plotting is for us. So whether it's anything that's in a tech stack, right? If somebody's offering an identity solution, a new type of audience segmentation platform, we have to do a lot of work to figure out if in fact we're getting something and figuring out where does it actually plot in relation to a charting like this one. So we'll talk about this later, but I would say that this is just critical in general as far as assessing if we're getting the value that we need from something that's being hyped. And some factors to consider include, what's the business value? What are we getting out of this as an organization, as a team, as a department? What ultimately happens for the end user, if it matters what happens to the end user or the individual who's leveraging a technology, how is this improving the output that you're giving to whoever your end client is? Complexity, how challenging, this is one of the trickier parts, is that oftentimes if you talk to some of these solution providers, they can get really hairy when it comes down to the details. They won't tell you as much information as you need before signing up. There can be reluctance, so figuring out exactly how challenging will this be for us to ultimately activate? Also, dependencies. What do we need? What are the externalities that are a part of this equation? How do we want to interpret that and see if it makes sense for us? Time sensitivity. How long do we have? How long are you expecting us to lean in to the technology that you're bringing to the table, just so we are managing our own expectations and figuring out if this is the solution for us? And finally, team capacity. You need to make sure that your team is able to use the solution that's being proposed and that it's going to work for them, or if you need additional infrastructure, support, or talent to work in this new type of innovation or hype, if it makes sense, to bring into the folds of what you are doing. So what are questions we should be asking? A couple of them include, and this is crazy how often this is an issue, is the product available for use? So often, you're gonna learn about some sort of new technology, and if you start asking a lot of questions, they'll say, you can't really test it before you buy it. We'll tell you about it, we'll kind of give you some ambiguous case studies, but the details aren't gonna quite be there. It's not a good sign. What is the required investment for that product or set of products? We talked about investment a second ago. What utility does this ultimately provide our brand or our clients' needs? What does that look like? Do we feel satisfied with what it's bringing to the table? And do we need to pair it with some other elements as well? How does this emerging opportunity support our larger business objectives? Because oftentimes, if you're bringing something to the table, sometimes we're trying to convince people that we should make an investment because the end decision doesn't end with you. There's somebody else that needs to be involved, maybe many people who have to be involved. So making sure it's connecting to those larger objectives. And then finally asking ourselves this question: what triggered the hype cycle and what preceded it? Why did they bring this into existence? Like, that kind of origin story does matter. You want to make sure when something's being proposed to you, you understand what that is. Oh, And is this a smart advertising strategy for us to explore relative to everything else you already have on the table? Because ultimately, investments are limited. Even if you have big budgets, you need to understand where your money's going and if it makes sense. So how do we navigate hype more simplistically after going through all these points? You want to focus on your problems. Don't worry about what everybody else is doing. Don't worry that somebody else is adopting something and it's in the trades and it's making them seem like there's something of value there. Ultimately, your problems are this: malignancies that are affecting the business that you're working on as an advertiser or marketer. It may go dormant in the short time, but ultimately it's going to resurface. That whole 2.0 argument I was making earlier, that's where something like not resolving for addressability, issues with attribution, those are gonna show up in a scary way, and end users who are not a part of our immediate marketing and advertising ecosystem, they're not gonna be pleased with some of the things that are inevitably gonna happen as time passes on. We have to develop a deeper perspective. Sometimes if you ask somebody a question about, do you understand what a CDP is? Do you know what a data clean room is? They'll say, yeah, I think we put a POV together on that a year ago. But you have to put in a lot more time and labor to actually understand what that looks like. So making sure that that familiarity is going to a place that is much deeper if you think it's going to be necessary, potentially, for you to leverage it for the future of the business you're working on. And then finally, assess value for your goals. You want to tether your commitments to your existing challenges and potentially the challenges of tomorrow, but really what you know you're going to deal with, not what somebody else is dealing with, and what you're really responsible for. Sometimes people who do not work in your immediate division or world won't understand the impact that is inevitably going to occur. So making sure that you're really bound by that and fighting the fight that you need to, or not fighting the fight because it's not worth it. So to kind of wrap things up over here, I want to make a couple of points. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg as it relates to this conversation. There's so much more to talk about, and I really think that South by Southwest is a perfect place to build greater community and just continue the conversation. So what are other things that you can be the beneficiary of if you're interested? As it relates to things that I can offer, I do workshops, I do speaking engagements, I do panels. I also have resources, so I'm going to showcase a link so you can learn more, and also offer webinars as well. Ultimately, I want to save a little time for Q&A, but also I want to make sure that we can continue this conversation right now with the remaining time we have together. Do you want the slides? You might want the slides. Then you want to scan the QR code on the left. You can also be connected to me if you would like to. And I have my LinkedIn up here. I have my Twitter. And I have a podcast, if you're interested, called Ad Tech Unfiltered. And with that, if anybody has any questions, we've got a couple of minutes. Thanks, everybody, for the time. And let's get into it. Thanks, everyone. All right, we've got like 10 minutes for questions.
I'll start because everybody seems a bit shy. So I think the question I have is, obviously it's really obvious when it comes to NFTs, but I think for someone that works in climate change, like this is a room full of marketers, but I think I came here because I was trying to assess when in marketing is always about storytelling, but when it's done in a genuine way versus it's done for some top end, and then specifically with greenwashing, and everyone trying to do value propositional marketing. So you focused a lot on this aspects of it, but in terms of value propositioning, when people really are trying to position themselves in the market to care, when it's all full of shit, excuse my French, how do you navigate that? Like, how do you, as a brand, really like avoid coming across as that, but also as a consumer, be able to understand when people are using these tricks?
Yeah, and that would be another angle for me to go down, would be the branding side. I was trying to decide which road do I go down? More of the branding considerations versus getting into more of the technological component. And I think there's a hype element for both of them, right? Like, we're just walking away from International Women's Day. I have a lot of feelings about that. Why do we only have one day? In addition, like for greenwashing, massive issue. I mentioned ESG briefly as it relates to the angle with which I can affect it. There is this use of responsible media. So where's the sources from which we're getting Where are we sourcing inventory? How are we placing? How are we reaching people? What are the audiences that we want to engage with? So that's a little bit about the tech angle. I think in general, pertaining to your question, we have to assess both. We want to think about the technology we're having. We want to think about the storytelling that we're having. Who are we talking to? Are they really going to trust what we're saying to them? And does this actually align with us caring about what we suggest that we do? So it's a big topic. There's no like easy answer to that, right? There's a lot of work that goes into it, but it's important that you brought it up, and it's a part of the larger conversation for sure. Thanks for asking.
Hi, Noor.
Hi.
My name is Nadir. I'm from India, and I just want to say that I have learned a lot today through your presentation. So firstly, thank you for that.
Sure.
Coming to the question, you spoke a lot about the journey of hype. When it comes to digital advertising, marketing, measurement is extremely critical, right? Because the investments that you make on multiple digital platforms, you don't get a specific measurement chart because every platform has its own set of measurement outcomes, right? Where do you see that headed? Where do you see measurement for digital platforms, especially cross-channel platforms on digital? Do you think we can converge it to a single unit of measurement, which becomes very easy for advertisers and clients to look at and say, okay, this campaign worked?
Right now, I would say right in this moment, we are like screwed. We're in a lot of trouble. If you're in the digital marketing space, the solutions that are on the table, I don't care how much enthusiasm with which any big tech player, I'm not going to call the big tech players out, what they're proposing and putting on the table, and by the way, I work with all of them, so I'm both grumpy about it, but also ultimately need to work within the confines of technology that's actually available. Measurement is the most neglected part of the conversation because there's so much focus on targeting. How do we just reach the right people? That's where so much time and energy has been placed. So measurement is something we're just now starting to, in my opinion, really lean into in any capacity. And that's because we've already been failing on the addressability/targeting piece. We're like, how do we talk about attribution and measurement when we can hardly reach the right people moving into the future that we're leaning towards? So that's kind of the comment I have. There's no perfect answer. Do you think there's going to be a standardized solution at this moment? It's a mystery what it's going to be, but we're all looking for one. Thanks for the question.
Hi, I'm going to beg to differ with you there about the most neglected component. I'm an advertising lawyer, so I work with everybody across the entire spectrum. And I'm curious, as you talk about all of the different factors to think about, whether you want to jump into a new hype, where does legal fit in? Because so many of these things that we talk about, all the different divisions or functions in the company will talk about it, and they don't think to connect with legal to figure out, hey, what are the legal implications of going down this path? I mean, I go all the way back to influencer marketing, and everybody wanted to do it, and they didn't stop to think about what does the FTC think about this, and the endorsement guides, all that stuff. So I'm just curious, where in the sort of pathway do you bring legal in and go, hey, are there implications that we might not be thinking about if we want to adopt this technology?
Thank you for asking the question, because there's always things that need to be brought into the folds of this conversation that we're not going to hit. Legal is a big part, especially when we're talking about addressability, targeting, data collection, data privacy, a big problem. The challenge, I'd say, for a lot of people here is not that they don't want to talk to legal, it's that sometimes legal, and we can talk about this even after this, sometimes you get a little bit of the brush off as far as how detailed we can get into the conversation. It depends on who you're working for. If you're on the brand side, there may be a much bigger legal team that can help address and needs to address a lot of challenges, because otherwise there could be massive impact on the business. If you work on the agency side, it depends. Like, when can you approach them? What are the circumstances? Are you exploring and navigating some new solution? What else is on their plate? How many things are they going to assess? When are they going to tell you the latest? Is it their responsibility to interpret the law in relation to what could be thousands of campaigns, depending upon what the agency is focused on and what their responsibility is? So from my perspective, there's a lot of things on your plate. You should be brought in right away. It's really a question of, is it worth your time, and do you have the time to invest in it?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
What do you think and feel is the future of the metaverse or omniverse? Or
What do I think about the metaverse and the omniverse?
The future, yeah.
The future. I feel like if you are doing something that correlates at this moment, and I'll say it from the perspective of somebody who's thinking about marketing and advertising concerns. If you're focused on reaching people who are already in a gaming lane, then it's worth the time and energy to keep going down that pathway. Where I'm seeing things in this moment, I do think that there's potential for the metaverse. We're just farther away from it. So if you looked at that hype cycle chart that I shared, metaverse was, and I didn't showcase every last thing as it relates to the key, they're saying that it could be at least 10 years out from being where it potentially could be. I don't know if there's any owners of like the new Apple headwear or Oculus. When I wear Oculus, a pair of Oculus, I feel sick. I feel like, I remember I went to a exhibition where they said, you can try this out, and I stopped using it after a couple of minutes. And I don't mean that means it's not valuable. It means that there are many more iterations it needs to go through so that that proof of concept is something that's going to be generally available. Right now, the opportunity is, do you want to reach an audience that likes to game and that uses these headsets or has a propensity to use them? And does it make sense to reach them in those spaces? For them, it makes sense. If it's for a more general, broader audience, then we are going to maybe have to wait potentially up to 10 years.
Yeah,
That's
I was
my
thinking more,
feeling.
thank you, in terms of real estate and in terms of websites becoming metaverse, like stores and companies having metaverse representations.
So I would say where I sit, I'm more so seeing if that happens, then I'll learn about it, if that makes sense, right? So there are people who are on the developer side that are working on those things. If you're working oftentimes in the marketing and advertising world, you want to see what hits. But if and when it hits, it's like a relay race. You're waiting for it to happen to say, there's enough momentum here, it makes sense for what I'm doing, and then I'm going to lean in. It would be hard for me to have like a hard perspective on how likely it is, because I just haven't stayed up to date on like the latest with real estate. I feel like things are going well with, let's say, Roblox, but everywhere else, I mean, who here who's still in the room owns a piece of real estate in the metaverse? I'm holding my hand up, but it's just symbolic. So it looks like, unless I'm mistaken, it doesn't look like anybody raised their hand. And of course, probably brands and advertisers are the ones most likely to do it, but they also want to invest in places that are safe. So they'll probably do it in like a Roblox, somewhere where there's a fully existing infrastructure, but probably for somebody who really is leaning into the metaverse, they may not perceive Roblox as truly a metaverse. So I think it's going to be a minute before we see like a Ready Player One type of scenario. I think that's going to be well over 10 years possibly, but I know there's momentum. It's just for me to more so watch it versus like knowing the latest and greatest.
Okay, I just want to clarify one thing. I was thinking about selling real estate, not virtual real estate.
Wait, sorry, one more time?
I was thinking about selling real estate, not the virtual real estate.
Okay, so when you're
saying... Does that make any difference?
Selling real estate...
using metaverse to sell real estate.
Sell real estate. Like
yeah,
in
real
world.
estate. Yeah.
Well, I guess I think that there definitely is potential for that, right? That becomes more of the one-off opportunity for a marketer. Then I think there's plenty of room, right? If you can get in front of somebody, it just depends on what's the user experience you're looking to offer.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're up on time. Thank you everybody for sticking around. Again, would love to stay in touch with folks. Scan the QR code. Have a great rest of your day at South by Southwest.